I thought I would go back to the question that Ben asked some weeks ago. The question being, what do you say about Qi Gong? How do you introduce Qi Gong to people who've never done it? If you're teaching a class, what do you say about what it is and what it's for? I'm going to read a criticism that was anonymously given through NUNM. They have this anonymous criticism that they can make of their teachers, and this is what somebody said about my class. As a traditionalist, I appreciate the structure of view, method, and fruition, which this lacked. In general, the Qigong presented at the school has been mostly method. What is the view? Why do this? Otherwise, we just do it with the view we already have. If I were a fundamentalist Christian who believed that my body was sin, would the class be the same?
When was this?
I don't know. I was cleaning out my briefcase because I no longer need a briefcase anymore, and I just happened onto that. I think it's quite old, actually. See, I've always always taught the same way basically, and that is you start with method. You start with a form, and you ask the students to just do it on as an experiment to see how it affects them, to see if they like it. They don't like it. See if it feels good. They don't feel good. You start with the form, and then you ask the students to tell you what they're experiencing, or to ask a question about how they're experiencing, and then you can explain more about what it really is. I think that people learn faster that what it is that way, I think, to just do it and then sort out intellectually what it is. I really do think that the history of it, though, is important and relevant, particularly for that method of teaching. I think that method goes all the way back. And I think the basic techniques that are most important go back further than organized religion of any kind. But it has ridden along in all kinds of practices through the centuries, so that it is very adaptable to whatever view a person may have. There are Christians doing it, there are Muslims doing it, there are Hindus doing it, there are people from, of course, Buddhists and Taoists, but there are forms of Qi Gong in virtually everything but Christianity, really, or at least Western Christianity. For some reason, by some method, the Romans were able to stamp out movement as a kind of practice. The Romans, after they became Christians, anything to do with the body, I think they were freaked out about because of how weird Rome got toward the end. But for whatever reason, the ideas that are in China are also in Europe for the most part, and the only reason for me to go to China was really the movement part of it, the breathing, moving exercises, and they were part of a tradition that avoided a consistent name. So whenever you hear people refer to the practice that doesn't have a name, oftentimes you get these kinds of exercises contained within it. The current name, and I think this is significant, the current name that the people who taught it to us was Qi Gong. Now that is the name given it in the 50s when the Chinese Communist Party tried to extract it from the feudal religions of China. Strip out all the religion, essentially, from it, and have it as a scientifically based practice. And they even worked at trying to prove it scientifically. And there was this government-sponsored movement in China to reclaim this as one of the great treasures of China and strip it of its superstition and export it. And the name they gave it was Qi Gong. And Wong was in the middle of that. The guy who we learned it from. He was able. Well, what happened was, after Mao, a guy named Deng Xiaoping got into power, and he started to bring back all the old stuff as maybe a way for China to make money. Plus, maybe it was really valuable, and so they had this government-created movement to try to find people who still knew this stuff. And Wong was able to escape exile in faraway Kham by coming and showing what he could do and becoming essentially a part of this government attempt to make Qigong modern and scientific and export it, really. So how Wong practiced and how he taught it to us was stripped, basically, of the religious background of Taoism. He just taught it as a moving, breathing practice. Now, he made it clear that it came from a Taoist priest and somehow was connected with shamanism. But he didn't evoke any gods. He didn't talk about any cosmic principles for the most part. He taught it as a method, as a practice. At its heart, really, the idea that you can take in light just like you can take in oxygen. That there are methods by which you can bring light into your body, store it and condense it, and make it what would appear to be supernatural force. I don't think you should tell that to people first meeting. But if you notice, all the exercises involve the evocation, not of gods or spirits or higher forces, but light. The whole thing is based on the idea of bringing light in. And light, of course, is something everybody has experience with. You know that theoretically you've learned in school that light is not something you can see. You can only see when these, whatever light is, hits something physical and make it glow. But light itself is invisible and exists everywhere within a certain radius of a star like the sun. And this is why, in terms of how I introduce it, and I don't necessarily think it's universal, and I don't follow it always, but I prefer, instead of using the term Qi, to use the term light. And I think it is because Qi is a much more difficult thing to visualize, just because at its essence, and I like the whole etymology of characters and how the breadth and different uses that they have in the language. And I think sometimes coming from someone who's a non-speaker, to see how it gets used in different places really broadens the understanding of a word at its essence. The pictogram of Qi is a picture of a grain of rice, a picture of the wind, a picture of a lid, and then a line between the lid and the wind. And the story of the etymology is that rice cooking in the pot, something comes up from it and lifts the lid. What is that something that comes up? Well, of course, we know all about that because we're modern. It's steam. But what it is some invisible force that comes and pushes something physical that can be seen. But in terms of what we experience when we practice, you start to feel something moving. And you have the idea that there are subtle forces, like even in what's known scientifically, the electromagnetic body. Without electromagnetism in every cell, if that whole thing gets disrupted in any way, you're dead. So there are invisible forces, even that we know about, like electromagnetism, that has a lot to do with how our bodies work and function. So the idea that we have a body of some kind of substance that is much subtler than that, that is every bit as real, but we don't have developed enough organs in that vibratory range to really see it, except that can be developed by picturing it to begin with. Closing your eyes and picturing light coming into various parts of your body, and the experience of what you are actually able to sense then over time gets stronger and stronger. So if people are curious, when you say we're doing Qi Gong, what do you mean by Qi? I think practically you can fall back to George Lucas just fine and say it's some sort of invisible force that can be either light or dark, that different people have different amounts of, and that can be used, and that certain people can use, can learn to use it and work with it for good or ill. That has been an accepted idea in many cultures as far back as you want to go. It's just in the last couple of 100 years that people have said you can explain everything just totally by what we know of physics and chemistry. But I think it's best with people who are beginning to stay with things that they can actually experience and start with it as, okay, try this the way you tried cannabis for the first time. See how it affects you and if it has a positive and negative effect. Because how it affects you cannot really be explained adequately theoretically. People are slow learners and they only have a certain amount of attention span for learning something. So if you're just going to be with them for a short time, you just take pieces. You don't try to teach them a whole form unless they seem really open to it and you can think of one, and but I think it was good sense that we started it in UNM. First quarter, we don't teach a form. The concept of Qigong, particularly the term Qi and how broad it is, but it is also, in this context, referring to the life force which flows through the body and which can be stored, concentrated, and intentionally moved in greater and greater degree as one's practice. It's cumulative. The longer one practices, the more that more kind of force is palpable. Well, Jin, of course, is tendon, fascia, and that is the one thing about this school that's you don't see in the names of other Qigong schools or martial arts schools or anything. I've only seen it in this school. That they start with the word Jin, and I think it really is central to the difference between this practice and pretty much anything else. Though these same exercises are done in a lot of different systems, but the whole idea of starting with the tendons as something physical that can be strengthened to the point where something metaphysical can be experienced. The relationship between these two words, Jin and Jing, is really crucial, I think, to understanding the basic nature of this particular approach. And my understanding of what he's saying is that if you can learn to relax the muscles totally while you are stretching and strengthening the tendons. Then the meridians or channels of force that move through the body can move unimpeded and be more experienceable and stronger. But it is based around the whole idea of stretching the joints, to stretch the tendons, to strengthen the tendons by stretching them and opening and healing the joints by stretching them. And this particular basic practice is the hardest part of it to learn and the most important part, really. That with the idea that you're creating within your belly this ball of literal fascia, connective tissue, that takes in, at first through, who knows, a visualization or what, but you start to have the experience of this fascia in your lower belly being stretched by this expanding ball of light in your lower dantian. And through that process, this invisible, palpable force that you can feel moving through your body can start to move if the extremities are realigned and the joints are opened up and the fascias strengthened, so that it can pull this force through the body. And that is the first step in terms of straightening out the body so that it can do perhaps much higher and more transcendent kind of things. But this style really starts with Ming. Li Jie was said to be a Guanyin Taoist. And from their point of view, if you talk to people who study that religion, which it is at this point, they always talk about dual cultivation, that there's Ming and Shing. And by legend, northern Taoists start with Shing, which is the true nature of the person that is held within the heart, who you really are. And that needs to be cultivated primarily, but also it's very helpful to work on your Ming, which is the other end, and which the northern Taoists, by legend, say, okay, first you work on Xing and then you work on Ming. Ming is these kinds of weird physical breathing exercises that have to do with your body's fate and what you are limited to in terms of your mechanical apparatus. Some people's legends, the southern Guanyin Taoists started with Ming. And in that sense, when I start with people, and when Wong started with us, it was through Ming more than Xing, which my preference is that it gets cultivated silently in secret through direct transmission.
Xing?
Xing, yeah. So definitely this is, in that sense, the southern style, because I start with method, I start with technique. Xing is sometimes translated as the virtues, like de and run, and the various things that come out of the cultivation of the heart. And Ming is your basic genetic imprint, your basic fate, what has been decreed by heaven that that your life happens as. So fate in that sense. So you're limited by your genetics, which has gender and nationality and all of these kinds of stuff. But there are things about that can be changed through particular kinds of practices. What we are calling Qigong is one of those. Xing is more what happens to the heart. If you have a certain connection with and an ability to experience what it is you're feeling, then in the moment you feel what is new, what is arising, and who you are. And it's a practice that is very simple to know about intellectually, but to incorporate it into your practice so that it's happening all the time is much more difficult. And it's not something that I talk about a lot, because I think talking about it a lot oftentimes has the opposite effect. People feel guilty because they're not constantly present and being in their hearts. And to put it in words oftentimes limits what it is in a way that's unuseful. I really do think that it's something that gets transmitted to a great extent by the conditions that you put yourself in, particularly the people that you meet and are around, and that you can take in qualities of heart that other people have, and that will help your Xing grow. It's a direct transmission that comes down through person to person. There are exercises for Xing, but there are, see, for me, in my history, that was the essence of the whole Gurdjieff thing. And the exercises for Xing, for being, were to put yourself into situations intentionally so that you see yourself most vividly and see what it is that you are capable of doing and not doing, and get a sense for your purpose and meaning. So you see something that disturbs you about yourself in some way, and you find some way of putting yourself in a situation so that is seen and experienced in a way that causes acute suffering. And out of that is the cultivation of true virtue. Now that's the tradition that I came from, though. That's kind of a mishmash of Gurdjieffian ideas with...
Yeah. Have you, in your readings, and sort of come across the Taoist version of what of Xing?
All I've got is what of the Taoist version is what Wong taught, and for me it is. This is a Southern school that starts from the body and moves from the body then to the heart. So at the very end of the physical practice, where you're focused internally inside your body and sensing all the different parts of it, at the very end you go into the heart. And it, maybe you're only there for a minute, or you're only making that effort for a minute to let in gratitude and feel what the heart feels. And for me, at that moment, that's a very vivid experience. And that really is a taste of how to go about working, for me, with Xing. Because I can't do it with my head. I can't say, well, it would be good to love everybody and to always be in my heart, and I will do that. It just doesn't work that way. For me, it comes from a connection between the physical body and the emotional body that the heart can then witness. Now, that may be my own peculiarity, but so much of the stuff that I did in the Pune commune was about opening the heart that way in fairly direct, dramatic, difficult, dangerous kinds of ways. And I can see people experimenting with that, just like experimenting with acid is good for a lot of people. But as something that I would try to teach, I prefer a much subtler approach in terms of an atmosphere of heart-centeredness that's not spoken about particularly, but is there, that can be felt. And at very critical places in doing the form, where you connect intentionally, you're open, your body is open, your pericardium is open for a little while, where you can drop into the heart and feel it. To tell you the truth, I think that experience, even though it may be very brief, sends a signal out into the cosmos that alerts your secret Taoist, your hidden master that notices something is starting to wake up and be alive, and then they come help, and that's where the real work of the Sheng starts, is when you have someone who really can move energy through you and guide you into what you most need. As an invisible presence, you don't really know what it is. Boy, I hope Kelsey figures out how to edit this so it doesn't sound completely garbled.
I've become a master.